right, welcome back, everyone. I'm glad to see some of the folks who have been in some other sessions this week. It's nice to see you back with us. This afternoon, we are pleased to host today's last actual webinar for the day. We're pleased to host Dr. Jessica Kruger from the University at Buffalo. She's a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Community Health and Health Behavior. Dr. Kruger will be sharing about her experience collaborating with her students to build course content. So welcome, Jessica, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Great to see some names that I recognize, and I look forward to meeting those and talking with everyone whose name is new. So I'm excited to be here today and talk about some ways in which I love to collaborate with students and how you can really use their collaboration and their input to build better courses. Oftentimes when we think of open education, we're thinking of creating materials, we're thinking of building a book or some other content. But in fact, I think we can think about this a little bit more broadly, and we can think about it in the way of course design and course input. So what I want to convince you of, or at least persuade you to think a little bit more about today, is why you should turn to your students for input in your courses before, during, and even after a course is finished. So I want to check in with all of you. It's about week 5 in my university, maybe a different week in yours. In the chat, just put one word to describe your current feeling today. Can be positive or negative. Chris, yeah, a nap. Energized, great, good, encouraged, energetic. Everyone's like, oh, a nap, yeah, enthusiastic, great, lots of meetings, not enough time for grading. I can get behind that one. Some of these tired too. So great, thank you for checking in with me. It's always good to be able to have some open dialogue. And as we're going through this presentation, feel free to pop information in the chat or any questions. I'm happy to stop and kind of address those as we move forward. So what we're going to kind of walk through today is talk a little bit about open pedagogy, which most of you are familiar with. I then want to take most of the time and talk about some how and when I have incorporated this into courses and maybe ways you will want to do that in your courses. And then some ideas and some lessons learned from doing this so you can make not the same mistakes that I have made along the way. So opening up, being open to open practices. It's very meta, I feel, but I think it's important that we start kind of with a definition. So this may or may not be your definition. This is one that I tend to gravitate towards. So open pedagogy is the practice of engaging with students as creators of information rather than simply consumers of it. And so some key words there are engaging and creators, right? And that is really having students be investors in their course and begin to invest in their own education. So collaboration. All of us collaborate in higher ed. We're collaborating with each other. We're collaborating sometimes with students. But collaboration could look very different in every classroom. Can someone give me an example of how they collaborate with students in their classroom? Feel free to type it in the chat or unmute.
You could just ask questions. You ask questions, right?
Exactly. Just as I was asking you, Richard, that was great. It's almost like I paid you to be in that. Oh, co-create course text, create a webcast together. How neat. Creating content. Yeah, many of you are here because you believe in the fact that collaboration is key for students in lifelong learning, but also in your classroom. But do you view students as collaborators in your course content? Do students give you a say in how you run your class. Maybe, maybe not. And what kind of say do students have? Is this an equal say? Or is this a say that, they may have some suggestions, they may have some feedback on assignments? And when we think about teaching, we have to think about transparency in teaching. And I think this is key. I was having a really great conversation with some of my teaching assistants this morning who are, they're going and finishing up their PhD. And they say, I never really realized how important transparency is in a classroom. It allows you to be able to express what you're feeling, have students feel open about expressing what they're feeling, and also, squash any sort of feelings that may be unneeded or unnecessary. So for example, I always check in with my students, just as we did earlier in this meeting. I always see how they're feeling. And guess what? About this time of the semester, they're feeling tired. And frankly, I'm also completely exhausted at this time of the semester. And this is where stuff starts falling off my plate and ending up on the floor or maybe 3 feet over there. And so I'm transparent with them and I say, I'm feeling the exact same way as you are. Let's talk about how we can work together. Do you need an extra day on your assignments? They're like, yeah. I was like, okay, can I have an extra day to post materials? They're like, yeah, that sounds great. And so being transparent with your students allows for an environment to be created that supports this collaboration. Empowering students to feel that they are collaborators begins to build more discussions and more opportunities for students to speak up and speak out and even speak with each other. And so I think really, as we're thinking about how to collaborate with students, it's a lot more than assignments. It can really be the whole structure of your course. So you already told me a little bit about what ways you collaborate, but now that you've learned a little bit about course structure and course feedback and transparency, are there other ways that you collaborate with your students that maybe you haven't thought about before? Feel free to type in the chat or unmute yourself. Changes to the course, that's great, Diane. Creating assignment questions, oh, that's the best when you can have students create some questions. They're often really good at it. Surveying students about course ideas, that is perfect. That is a great way to get some feedback and even infuse some innovation. Critiques, yeah, those are great. You sometimes have to have some tough skin for those. Those are great ideas and things that you're already practicing. So another part of creating a collaborative environment is creating an encouraging environment, and to encourage students to really think about how they want to be treated and how you want to be treated, and encouraging them to be that collaborator. Now, I was trying to change this to perseverance since it had a little rocket, but anyways, for my space fans out there. But encouraging students to speak up, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in the lessons learned, but your students have to be able to communicate with you about what is going on. But oftentimes, as all of you just greatly demonstrated, sometimes there's a lag in that communication. Sometimes there's hesitancy in communicating with instructors. And that's probably because students have been going through the institution of whatever they're at and not always encouraged to speak up. I had a heartbreaking conversation with a student who they walked up to me at the end of class, and I could tell that they were upset. They were just, something was off. And they said, could I give you some feedback on something? I said, of course, I'd love your feedback. Please, please, what's on your mind? And they proposed a question to me about some of my materials. And I realized, oh my goodness, I had totally expressed something in a way that I didn't mean to express it. And I was like, thank you so much. I appreciate your thoughts. I appreciate your feedback. And I was able to change that for the next year. I also addressed that point during the next class. I've said, hey, someone spoke up about this slide, and I really want to make this correction so everyone's aware of the change. And being able to call yourself out and identify things that you've changed or you've modified, that's tough, but really that supports that environment of speaking out. Encouraging questioning. So I tell my students, question everything, including your grades, which can also be challenging, right? So how do I support questioning? Well, I ask students good questions, and I ask them a lot of questions. Questions can be whether in assessments or in check-ins or just general concerns that may be going on. Questioning is part of speaking up. Now, we all know that democracy is so important. This has been something that's been in the news, maybe more than we'd all hope that it would be in, but encouraging them to speak up, to question, creates an environment that allows them to think about how to change the world, right? If you're passive and you sit back and let everything go by you, how are you going to make those changes? So Stacy writes something really important here, that this really strikes her as abandoning the idea of their content structure as being scared, like giving up the I'm the professor, so I know best attitude. And that is exactly what we're trying to get away from. That is exactly something that I think this open education and this open philosophy tends to get rid of. Now, there are a lot of people who don't want to give that up, but I'm going to talk you through some ways that you might want to slowly shift your thoughts and philosophies and maybe consider doing that in the future, if you're not already now. So we put this all together in a giant bowl, we stir it up, and ultimately what you're trying to do is create a supportive environment and encourage your students to have a voice. By infusing some of these techniques and some of these methods, which I'll talk about in a moment, you're creating a supportive environment to help your learners grow, not only as academics, but as people, right? Some of these skills are not often taught. So how and when do we do this? I would argue all the time and in every part of your class. So I'm breaking this up in before, during, and after. And when I mean before, during, and after, I mean before the semester starts, during the semester, and after a semester has ended. So when I am planning a course, I love to include students in my course planning process. I'm not a undergraduate who is going to school at a SUNY institution who is interested in studying public health, right? That is not who I am. I'm on the other side. And so I want to know what they view as the most important things for my course. I want to know what interests them. I want to know what policies students think are fair and equitable. What expectations and what standards do they hold themselves to? And how can I incorporate that into my course design? Assessments. You know, as faculty, we can think of how to write a test. We can think of how to write a paper. But sometimes we don't see some other assessments that may be helpful for students' overall learning. How do you infuse some of your students' ideas into assessments? How do you support them to do something creative while also meeting the learning objectives? Well, I think it's asking them. I think it's having a conversation. And delivery method. We have all lived through pandemic pedagogy of switching things very quickly to another mode. But in fact, I think there's some ways where we can ask our students what works best for them. Currently this semester, I'm teaching a bicronius model, which is probably a new term because the term just came out not too long ago. That means my course has an asynchronous component and a synchronous component. But my synchronous component is short. We meet a half hour once a week. And during that half hour, we do active learning. The other parts of the course are asynchronous, which allows for a little bit of different flexibility for students. It's a different sort of model. And I got that delivery model idea from my students. This wasn't something that I came up with. I'm going to show you after I go through this slide, I'm going to show you what I use before a course in gathering this information. During a course, well, you just experienced one of my check-ins at the beginning of class. I think it's important to check in, see how people are doing, and it ultimately breaks the ice. Another check-in that I often do is what's on your mind. What's on your mind is really important because a lot of the current events, especially in my field of public health, are on our students' minds, whether it's the new vaccine or what's happening next in the world. I think it's important to understand where they're getting their information, because oftentimes you find that it might not be the same places where you're getting the information, or what current events have you missed and can allow them the opportunity to share their knowledge. I do a lot of reevaluating in my courses, and the reevaluation component of thinking about course design and course prep is something that we all fear, right? I made a plan at the beginning of the semester, I wrote a syllabus, and we're gonna follow it to a T. I think that's the traditional model. But in fact, I think there's an opportunity to reevaluate, especially if something's coming up in your course that you see it maybe or maybe not working. I was teaching a course last semester on, ironically, stress and population health. I thought it was quite funny to teach a class on stress during probably the most stressful time that anyone has ever been through, but thankfully we learned some stress reduction techniques. Well, we had a group assignment that I originally planned for that class. This was going to happen around week 8 or 9. And I just got this feeling from some of the assessments that they have sent in previously. People were getting tired. People were, just struggling emotionally, mentally. And so what I did is I asked them, I said, hey, we have this group assignment that's planned. It's in the syllabus, right? This is how many points it's worth. I would like to have a discussion about if you'd like to keep this assignment or do something different. And all of you who assigned group work all know that the answer to what they chose. They didn't want to do the group work. So we reevaluated, and actually we came up with a plan to take those components of that project and break them down into smaller assignments. And those smaller assignments met my same overall learning objectives. The students were happier, and actually they ended up collaborating, but not in a large group, but with one another in small groups. And so ultimately that made the course such a better experience for all of the students and for me, frankly. I didn't have to get all those emails about it's hard to meet with my group and all of this other stuff, but they still got to collaborate. Transparency, again, transparency is key because sometimes the policies that we put into place or the parameters that we put around assignments make complete sense to us, but maybe not to students. And when students don't understand why you do something, it can be challenging for them to understand the rationale. So why do I have quizzes due by 9 p.m. on Sunday? Did I pick 9 p.m. out of a hat? Any guesses?
One thought is that Blackboard has always told me when assignments that I would give during the week, and this is just actually one course, we meet only once a week, when it is done.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be from that. Oh, Michael Daly, you got it. 9 p.m. is when I go to bed, actually. And so if they have an issue with their quiz, I am not going to be awake to fix it if it's due at midnight. And so I tell students that. I tell them that, the reason why I do this is I go to bed, but also this is a public health course. So Rebecca and Richard, it's because they need sleep too. You shouldn't be staying up till midnight to do these quizzes. And so after I explain this to students, they really start to understand the rationale behind some of the choices. Now, of course, many people do midterm evaluations, and this is important, and this is helpful to get a feel for how things are going in your course with your students. And that's traditionally done in a survey sort of form. But you can also check out how you're doing with directions, right? So we all have assignments, we all have directions. I had a student reach out today and say, how many words do you want in that paper? And I don't believe in word counts. I mean, I believe that they exist, but I don't believe that they should be in papers because some students write more succinctly than others. And so I tell them that. I say, I don't have word counts, but what I do want you to do is I want you to read the rubric and I want you to read the assignment. And if you still have questions, reach out. I also tend to record directions in a short video so students can also hear them or read them or both. And that seems to help in this environment. But if I get a lot of questions about directions, that tells me that I really need to reframe or rethink how I'm writing directions. Sometimes I'll ask them, how could I make this sound better? Or how can I make this be more accessible to you? Okay, we've had a great semester and now it's after the semester. And so this is the time where all of us kind of wilt and like curl up in a ball and sleep for 3 days, but it's also time for reflection. And so at the end of the semester, it's always great to get those end of semester evaluations. Besides the university's end of semester evaluations, I like to include an evaluation that's very qualitatively based for my students. So I want them to answer questions about the course, of advice they would give to future students, what they think I should change. And I always make this anonymous, but I get some of the best feedback through those surveys that I've created outside of my traditional course evals. I like to take a day and actually do a course wrap up. So we have a conversation on the last day of class where I have this, slideshow presentation of all of the content that we've covered, and it's all pictures. So we talk through how everything's connected, how you can use it. And then I say, what did I miss? What did I miss in this course that you think would be valuable? And so each year I get more and more thoughts, more connections, more information in which I can continue to bolster the next course. We all have some of those students who are great allies that you have a really good relationship with in each course. And so I'll ask a few, could I do a quick exit interview with you? Could I just talk to you about how the course went? And oftentimes students are like, yeah, I'd love to talk with you. I'm getting done with my finals. I'd love to give you feedback. If you're lucky enough to have teaching assistants or student assistants, they are amazing at picking out the things that you should change in a course or giving suggestions to changes. You, of course, need to create that open, supportive environment so they feel safe enough to tell you what is really on their mind. So lots of ideas, right? Lots of things that you can think about doing. This is not something that you go in and change everything overnight, but it's something to think about as you're moving forward or thinking about course design. So let's take a moment and I want to show you what I do before a class starts and how I gather some of this information. Let me switch screens here. Okay. While I'm pulling this up, any questions on anything so far?
Some great comments, but I have not seen a question.
Great.
So feel
one-
free to post
one-
those too. Go ahead.
One
Richard.
thing I was just thinking that you had mentioned was, the what's on your mind part. And especially now, a lot of my students were in the medical field. They were treating, clients. They were working. It's a community college, so it's a lot of we have a lot of single parents. And I was a little bit afraid to ask that question because I was worried I might not know where to go or how long it would take to get through that. So it's just something that I I could generally get a feel from the whole class, but I was a little bit concerned about going through everyone and how they were feeling because I'm not sure they were feeling that great.
Yeah, I think some great ways that you can do that in a quick fashion is, write it on a piece of paper, hold it up. Or if you're virtual, have them type it in the chat. But it gives you a sense. And sometimes you're totally off. Today, I was totally off with one of my courses. I was like, oh, you guys are doing great. Good. I'm not, but let's move on. And so it was nice to really have that, that dialogue and see where they're at. And I think you make a good point of, do you have the resources to support them? No, you're not their counselor, but you can direct them to resources on campus. So I want to share, this is a survey that I sent out to my course before the start of the semester. This course is called Incarceration and Public Health. So we get to talk about the effects of prisons and jails on overall population health. In this, I tell them a little bit about the course design. So we don't have tests or exams. But here are the things that you're going to do to keep that in mind. And I encourage them that the co-creation, that I encourage them to be part of the co-creation process throughout the course. So, I asked them, what modality do you want? We're gonna have 1 hour meetings on Thursday, but what else? Do you want to do discussion boards or do you want brief meetings? Now, this one was interesting to me because they all picked discussion boards. But now, guess what? We're doing options. We're doing choices. Someone brought up choices earlier. So on Tuesdays, you can either hop on a quick call and talk about these, or you can post on the discussion board and you earn points either way. This course has a lot of writing, so I wanted to gauge their information about, APA style. This allowed me to add more resources into my course because a lot of students were maybe somewhat confident or not very confident, which tells me I need to spend some time actually talking about this instead of just assuming that they know this. Policies, right? What's a reasonable policy for attendance? Choose all that apply. In fact, they chose the 3-minute rule. They also asked for a free absence, and they thought it was important that everyone participated. Now, I could have said that, right? I could have said, here are my rules, but instead, giving them a voice, they actually all show up on time. It's amazing because they chose those. What about late work? What do you think we should do for late work? Of course, we would all say, well, late work should not be accepted, so then there's less stuff for us to grade, but that's not the way that this works. They actually chose the 10% point reduction and must be turned in within 4 days. I also have a policy in all my courses that you have a 2-day grace period, no questions asked. So if something is due on Tuesday, but life is busy or something came up, you can turn it in on Thursday. And that allows flexibility. And students don't have to explain what's happening. They just use it or they don't. What do you worry about in an online course? What do you like about online courses? This just gives me some feedback about what they appreciate, what they don't like. And then, why did you even take this course? This is a weird class on incarceration and health. What motivated you? And then, of course, that information on topics to discuss, which gave me some great ideas of new content to include in my class. So that's just a sample of what you could think about doing if you're designing a course for the next semester, because it really allows you some great information and feedback and things to consider. Each semester is a little bit different and your students are different. And so asking them has been something that I've found to be incredibly valuable. Does anyone do something similar in their courses around asking those questions?
There have been some comments about that in the chat too, with what other folks do with different strategies.
Oh, that's
And I just wanted to mention one that I saw that I think also is particularly useful. Diane mentioned using an early semester feedback survey on things that matter most to her in designing and managing the course to see if she's hitting the mark or not, right? And that gives her enough time to make those adjustments during the course of the class.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, the more and more often you can get students to give you their feedback, the better. So, you know, during class, we talked a little bit about those check-ins. I like to have discussions, and I start this as early as the first class so students know that this is going to be something that they're going to hear throughout the semester. And it's weird. At first, they're very weirded out by it. They're like, why are you asking me this? But really, once you start talking about the importance of feedback and why you want them to be a creator in this, they really open up.
Taking a look at this, I like this. In the past, I've used a formative evaluation about halfway through to make sure we're on track. Whether I was teaching online or face-to-face, I found it to be very useful. And then a summative evaluation at the end, how they felt the course went. When I was teaching it face-to-face, I bring in pizza.
Ah, that's the best.
We had one college I was at, we had an enforced finals period. And there was no break for the students. My finals was noon to 1. So I'd bring in pizza, soda, and we just spend that as a bull session, talking about what they liked about the course, what they didn't like about the course. And I just translated that to online. But I think having this, because one of the difficult things that, is expectations for the students. And this helps them build, have an active role in generating the expectations. Even if there's a limited number of options that they feel they have more of a buy-in to it.
Most definitely. And, having that buy-in, that say, and expectation setting is different for everyone, depending on your background, I'm sure if I ask all of your attendance policies or all of your assignment policies about late work, we would all have a little bit of a different philosophy. So it's important to figure out where you fit in with where your students are thinking. What you like and dislike about an assignment, I always have them, I tell them there are certain words that you can't use because hard is hard. There's nothing that I can change about something being hard for you. But what I can do is make the directions more helpful. I can provide you more support, but just because you think it's hard doesn't mean that it's bad. So, again, the example about 9 p.m. deadlines. Students always hate this in the beginning. Once I explain it, they're very pleased about it. They're like, oh, okay, all my other classes are at 11:59, but I guess I get it. And we move on, right? There's very little, plus with a 2-day grace period, even if you don't get it done by 9 p.m., you have 2 days. So it kind of works in everyone's favor. So some different ways that we've kind of talked about and explored through this presentation are, of course, you can do written or verbal ways to checking in with students. So I talked a little bit about the check-in, the questions you saw, but I think small groups are really powerful. And so if you're online, you can put students in breakout rooms and say each group needs to come up with one thing that they would change so far this semester. And then they actually have a really robust conversation about what each other liked and didn't like. And in fact, it's really hard for them to agree on something that they dislike because they all kind of convince each other of why different components are good or bad. And so I think that's a really nice way for some peer support, but also to get other viewpoints on why some of these assessments may be important or why we're doing something the way we're doing it in class. Surveys and evaluations are another great way. But you can also do reflection assignments. And I think these are powerful when you're having a maybe large assignment. I have a podcast assignment in one of my classes. And students always think it's easier than a paper. They always do. They go into it and they're like, oh, we're just going to record some stuff. This is going to be great. It's going to be easy. And in fact, in all of their reflections, they say this was so much harder than a paper, because I had to work with others, I had to create a script, I had to think about it. And then, heck, I don't know how to record a podcast. I have to figure out how to record a podcast. And so they really, break down some of those challenges. And so the next semester I know, okay, well, students, before you go into this assignment, read some comments from past students about their experience so you can plan a little bit differently. Yeah, how do you use the content? That's great. Yeah, final summative assessments, SWOT analysis. Oh, I love SWOT analysis. Personal SWOT analysis are great. So these are all fantastic ways that you can utilize that material, or even maybe add some more of that material. So how do you do this? How do you move into a more open way of teaching? You first have to be very honest and open. And you have to be honest and open to your students, but to yourself. This is a total change in the way in which academia is typically created and typically done. And so you might be considered a little weird or a little odd or a little different from taking advice from students. But it starts with us. It starts with us being the change. You, of course, have to set the stage, whether that's before or during your first class, to really talk about and create and cultivate the environment that allows this to occur. And then you have to start small, right? You have to start small, whether that's maybe asking a survey in one class or doing more check-ins, but don't just change everything overnight. This is small progress and change. I share survey results to my students all the time, Jamie. We have a question about how often do you share survey results? In fact, my midterm evaluations, I create a slideshow and I present the mid-semester survey results to my students. That promotes transparency and it allows an opportunity for conversation around what we think should change. And so whenever we're having discussions or talking about assessments, I open it up for feedback, comments, and it doesn't take long. In fact, having these conversations, hey, does everyone agree? Raise your hand, right, on the virtual world, or give me a thumbs up, or, if you're maybe not sure about it, let me know. So I would be terrible to not tell you the lessons learned, which I have, discovered as I've gone through this journey. So you first have to feel if you're ready for this. And when I say ready, are you ready to hear criticisms about your teaching? Teaching is very emotional, right? And we put our heart and soul into it. And sometimes students can find those soul-crushing comments, as you probably all had on final evals. And so you have to be ready to open yourself up to criticism. And be okay to let it roll off your back and move on to the next thing. You have to figure out your style of presenting this idea and this philosophy to students. I'm very open and honest and transparent and authentic with my students, and that comes through in everything that I do. I will tell them that I'm running late grading their papers because I, wanted some work-life balance. I will tell them that, something's happening in my life and I might need a little bit of more time to do something. I expect them to have the equal openness and communication with me, because how do I know if they're struggling if they don't tell me? You really have to support all students, and that means being flexible in some areas that you may not feel that you're always flexible in. Fairness is key, right? Fairness is important. Flexibility is something that we all have to come up to and figure out, whether that's I'm delaying my grading a few days because I have students using a 2-day grace period or not. and then really encouraging students to speak up. And even when it's challenging, right? I always have a lesson planned of what we're going to do that day, but sometimes our communication about what's happening in the world takes a little longer. But you know what? That's important. That's important to acknowledge their voice, their thoughts, their feelings. And it creates for a much more robust discussion as we move into challenging materials. You have to see if this fits into your philosophy. I hope all of you have a teaching philosophy and revisit it multiple times, at least once a year, to see where this fits, or maybe it doesn't. So with that, I hope you're inspired to begin to think more open, be more open, and collaborate with your students. But it starts with you, and where you start is totally up to you. So thank you so much. I am happy to answer any questions or discussion.
Thank you, Jessica. These are some really great strategies that I think, you know, your point about starting small, we can just take one or two things away from your presentation and start trying to incorporate those with our students. So thank you for that inspiration as well. Are there any questions for Jessica? You're welcome to unmute your mic and chat.
Hi, Jessica.
Hello.
I'm a new administrative assistant. I have a teaching degree in elementary ed, but I decided not to teach in the elementary schools anymore, and moved home with my family because I'm taking care of elderly parents, and got this job, which is fantastic. I'm so happy to be here. Through that, there might be an opportunity for me to teach a college entrance, like prep course with the C-STEP program, which I would love to do, but I have not ever been a college professor before or of any kind whatsoever. So I was wondering if you could send me a link. I know somebody did send me a link to how SUNY does their online courses and stuff. If you have any other information, would you be willing to share it with me via email?
Happy to. Feel free to send me an email. Erin just put that in the link. And I also run a community of practice at UB that is open to anyone who would like to be part of it. So if you're interested in being part of learning more from other faculty and talking about these really tough topics, I call it pedagogical therapy. We all need it once a week. But anyone's welcome to join us. Just send me an email and I'll send you an invite. Last week we talked about midterm evaluations. Next week we're talking about, you know, motivation, encouraging students, and other tough topics. And so it's just nice to see other people's style, philosophy,
Yeah.
and ways that they engage with their students. I learned so much.
Thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it. I loved your presentation today very much. Thank you.
We have some more resources being shared there in the chat as well.
Okay, thanks. These are awesome. I really appreciate it.
If anyone is interested in saving the chat and you're not quite sure how to do that, in the chat window next to the file button, there are 3 little dots. You could click that and save the chat. It'll download that right to your computer. We have had a lot of not just links and so forth, but great suggestions from the conversation that's been happening in the chat. So it's nice to capture that as well.
I just did. That's awesome. I'm just really excited to be here. Old person, new teacher.
We're glad to have you as part of the community.
Thanks.
And for anyone interested in more information about open education in SUNY, Mike Daly just posted an email link there, oer@suny.edu. And you can also just go to, Mike, what is the website? Is it oer.suny.edu? I always mess it up. That's the email, but I know we have, I can't remember the website. There it is. Thank you.
Sorry, couldn't find my mute button there. There it is.
No worries. Just wanted to capture that in the chat there too. So, okay, fantastic. So given the time, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up for today. So I just want to thank Dr. Kruger for being with us. It's always a pleasure, and I love hearing, your strategies and how students are responding to the work that you're doing. So thank you for sharing. For everyone on the call, we are recording all of our sessions. They will be posted along with slides and other resources that have been shared on our website there. And we do have a feedback survey that we would love for you to participate in. That just helps us when we offer future sessions as we are planning. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and attention. This is the last session for today, but we will be back at it again tomorrow. So be sure to check out the schedule for the rest of the week.